Hello, everybody, and welcome to our special edition on colonial nostalgia. We've got a very special guest joining us today, all the way from a beautiful property in Darjeeling, which is the northeastern part of India. It's called Glenburn Tea Estate. It's set across 1,000 acres of land, and there are two beautiful rivers running across the property. Just talking about it, this makes it sound so heavenly, and I feel very jealous. I haven't been there right now. And it's also been awarded the best 101 hotels of the world by the Tatler Travel Guide. Our guest today is no other than the owner of the property, Ms. Husna Tara Prakash. She's got a beautiful history herself. Welcome to our episode, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Lata. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So we're just going to jump right into our special edition and the questions we have planned for you today. Can you take our viewers through a little history about the estate? I think we're all eager to hear about it.
Glenburn was planted out in 1859. As you know, Darjeeling was sort of a hill station for the British Empire, for the people living in the hot city of Calcutta. And at that time, the British Empire was trading with China to bring tea to England for their people to drink. It was the most popular beverage in the whole world. But when they started having an issue with China after the Opium Wars, they started planting tea in India. And there was a native variety that was planted in Assam, and there was a Chinese variety that was actually smuggled out to first the botanical gardens in Calcutta and then up to Darjeeling, where it did very well. So the British were gifted this patch of land by the King of Sikkim, and they started growing this tea very successfully. And they didn't really have the labor to grow the tea, so they had to bring in people from Nepal. And today we have communities within Glenburn who also work at the hotel that have been there for 3-4 generations. So it's this wonderful blend of sort of Nepali tradition and culture, but British colonial history and architecture. And at the same time, you know, it's in Eastern India, so it's in the state of West Bengal. So it has a very interesting mix of influences that have been brought in initially by the British and then continued on.
When you're talking about these influences, what are the architectural influences? If you tell us a little about the bungalows, and what are the real architectural influences? Like if we go there, what is there we can see, which is very prominent?
Mainly, the whole concept of a bungalow was that it was built on one level. So you have a lot of breezy verandas where people could sort of sit out and enjoy the breezes. And then the rooms open out onto these verandas and then onto the gardens. The Glenburn Borough Bungalow, which was the main sort of house where the Borough Sahib stayed with his family, is located on top of a hill. So it's got these wonderful 360-degree views all around. So it's really quite magical because it looks out to Mount Kanchenjunga, which is the third highest mountain in the world. It looks across to the town of Darjeeling, as well as the hills of Sikkim, and then down to the river valley. So Glenburn means river valley in the Scottish Gaelic language. So it came into our family more recently, and before that it was part of a much larger tea company where they had a sort of a change of management every few years. So when we started restoring the bungalow, a lot of work to actually remove the layers and to bring it back to its sort of initial glory. And that's what we really tried to do. And then we were able to sort of strip it back and then bring it back up to what it used to be.
No, that sounds like such a beautiful image. I feel I'm already transported there. So in terms of, like, you're talking about all the furnishing and the antique, is there any special, like a piece of antique or a, furnishing that really stands out and it's really like your favorite and you like to talk about it?
I think that the collection of beds that we have are really interesting. A lot of them are the old sort of Bengal zamindari style colonial beds. And then we've got a collection of all sorts of other really interesting beds and furniture. And then the wicker furniture, the cane furniture that we have out on the veranda. The original one that we then were able to replicate was actually just found dumped in a hen house. And I work with this very talented designer called Bronwyn Latif, and she really showed me how to make things out of absolutely, junk that we would have just thrown away. So we walked around the whole estate. We looked at every interesting chair, every interesting cupboard, sitting in the smaller, underneath a babu's sort of office, or an old fan that looked interesting. And then we brought it all back, and then we were able to sort of recreate this beautiful colonial atmosphere that really lends itself to the original architecture that was always there.
That sounds so interesting. So every little corner, every nook and corner really has a story. I'm sure when you're walking across the bungalows, there's so much that you go back to when you started it all. It's amazing.
We started off with certain items there, and then as I traveled, I would collect. I would go to antique markets in England, and even in America, I picked up a few things. So we've built up this amazing collection of prints, and even the furnishings. We've picked a toile de Jouy sort of theme, which came from the 19th century in France, the 18th century in France. The plant hunters that would come and sort of search for plants in the area, the botanicals, Joseph Hooker and Sikkim. So all that has been transported onto the walls and onto the furnishings.
So, but when you have all these guests that arrive to the bungalows, do they especially come, and are they looking for that colonial experience? I mean, are they especially coming for that? Do they reach out to you for that? And how do you really, recreate? I mean, obviously atmosphere is completely, there's like complete colonial nostalgia there. Are they asking for something else, or do you have to make a special, effort? Does your staff have to put together something special for them when you have guests, especially seeking like a colonial, experience?
It comes quite naturally because the whole place exudes this beautiful charm. But, colonial can have a positive connotation and also a very negative connotation. A lot of people look at plantations as, places where, you had the Barasab, and then you had, him walking around with a stick with all the laborers. But Glenburn is the total opposite of that. We have 55 members of the local community working in the hotel from the local villages. And the whole feeling is one of luxurious sort of charm and being welcomed into a family. It's like going to live with a rich aunt who lives on a country estate in England, except you're up in the mountains. So all the etiquette is there, the sort of beautiful afternoon tea, the teacups. I've been carrying beautiful teacups back from England for the last 20 years in my suitcases, and teapots, and there are fresh flowers everywhere, and there are electric blankets in the winter. So it's all about pampering the guests. And to do that, we have a host couple. So over the years, we've had many couples who've run Glenburn. At the moment, we have a charming ex-tea planting couple called Bertie and Audrey Amritanand, and they're assisted by Rudolph, who's also grown up in Darjeeling and has worked around the Himalayas for many years. So they welcome our guests not as sort of managers, but more as hosts. And even our sort of meals are had around a big communal dining table where we have fine china and silverware and crystal, and you're sitting down for a 3-4 course meal with your hosts who could have been the tea planters that lived in the bungalow. So that atmosphere is really created by the experience of the bungalow as well as the people. So it's the stories, it's the furniture, it's the prints, it's the furnishings, but also the whole energy that you get when you step into the Burra Bungalow. We're also in touch with some of the old managers' families, so they've sent us old black and white pictures of what it was like in the 1920s when their father went tiger hunting on the banks of the Rangi. A lot of history we've compiled from researching 2 or 3 of the previous families that have lived there. And then from 1968 to when we took over in the 90s, so we first researched the glory. I spent a whole summer sitting in the British Library in London, just researching what life was like in those times and in those bungalows before we started the project, so that we could really be true to what it was.
That sounds really interesting. Have you also, did you also have to do some research on food, or is there something special that you churn out in terms of cuisine, or the menu that you design for the property? How do you do that?
So again, a lot of that's been quite organic in its growth. So we started off with some very simple local sort of meals. Our first meal was a sort of momo and thukpa meal, which we complemented with some oriental salads and things like that, because that celebrated the local community. Then we went on to a Nepali meal, because most of our guests are foreign clients, so they like to have Indian food. They don't want to be served roast chicken and chips, although we can do an amazing roast chicken if somebody wants it. So we started off with more regional, more local, but served beautifully course-wise in a way that was a little bit more kind of anglicized, we have a beautiful tea-themed chicken dish, which is tea smoked chicken with an oolong-infused portion of rice, with a panna cotta, with a chai sauce, a green tea panna cotta with a chai sauce. So every item on the menu is inspired by tea. So that's one of our very popular menus as well. It is inspired by some colonial influences, but also the local community, which we really would like to celebrate.
That sounds really interesting. And you know how we're living in this today's world is all about social media. So if you were to dedicate like a selfie spot and I was to come to your property and take a selfie of myself, where would that be?
I think definitely in front of the mountains, looking out to the third highest mountain in the world, just from, standing outside or inside your bedroom is one of the most special moments that people have. And the mountains can be quite elusive. They come out in the morning. Sometimes they're shrouded by mist. Sometimes you can't see them. So we've had guests who've arrived and said, we don't even believe you when you tell us that there are mountains there. They can't possibly be there because, it looks clear, but you can't see the snow peaks. And then suddenly in the morning, they'll wake up and they'll be like, oh my God, that is amazing. If the weather is clear, we wake them up and we give them bed tea, which is again a very colonial Barasan kind of experience. So, and if the mountains are out, then they're invited in their pajamas to step out and take selfies in front of the mountains and have their cup of tea and sit out on the front garden. We've got so many beautiful verandas with these lovely creepers and plants, and the butterflies float in. So if you can catch a selfie along with a butterfly sitting on your teacup, that's very special.
That's quite a social media moment there. That's lovely. It's been so nice chatting with you. But before I let you go, you have to tell me, what's the estate's favorite seasonal tea? I remember reading about the autumn crescendo, I think it's called. But what would you say is the estate's favorite seasonal tea and why?
Seasonal tea on the estate is the moonshine, which is a specialty that we actually sort of developed ourselves. The tea bushes go to sleep in the winter because there aren't enough daylight hours and it's too cold. And then in spring, which comes in sort of mid-February, the end of February, the first two leaves in a bud sort of come out. So you've had the autumn crescendo to kind of call in the end of the season in November. And then the spring first flush is when the first buds come out. So just before that, we do a special harvest, which is called the moonshine, which has the first flush flavor, but it's a little bit lighter and more aromatic because we pick it very finely and from very special fields that are famous for their aromatic flavors. So for me, it would definitely be the Glenburn moonshine.
Love the story to it also. It sounds so beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us, Husna. It's been a really interesting time chatting with you. And good luck with the estate. And thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Lata. That was a pleasure.